What's up guys, Asian here again with another kind of impromptu video here, and today we're going to be discussing what you guys can do to best prepare for Dragon Bones. So Dragon Bones is releasing next Monday, the 12th for PC players, and I believe it is the 26th or 27th for console players, so console players do have 2 weeks in between the PC launch and the actual console launch, so you guys will be able to see just what's happening on the PC side of things in order to prepare yourselves for the eventuality of the console patch. So do keep in mind that the Dragon Bones still isn't out yet, and there is still one more patch that ZOSC has between the latest PTS patch notes and when it actually drops on live. So that's going to be pretty important, and that's a very important caveat to remember as we're going through this. ZOSC can and has in fact changed a lot of things between the last PTS patch and when the patch goes live. Horns of the Reach, for example, brought a lot of changes that we didn't see coming, and so a lot of what we had planned out, like Alcast's Mother Sorrow builds, were pretty much shot in the foot and completely destroyed based on those changes. So everything that I'm saying here, do remember to take it with a grain of salt, but now that we are on the last legs of the PTS testing patch, I don't anticipate that many major changes, and so everything here will likely stay more or less the same. There might be a couple of variations here and there, but it seems like for right now they're done with any sort of balance changes when it comes to PvE combat. So first of all, we're just going to be talking about from a DPS perspective, namely what kind of sets you can run and what you can expect from the various DPS specs. So everyone has been saying that Magicka DKs are pretty much dead now. This patch is pretty much the final nail in their coffin. Magicka DKs haven't been doing very well since Morrowind, ever since the nerf to sustain. They've kind of been on the back burner ever since Stamina DPS became a lot more survivable with the buff to Deadly Cloak. There's no longer a reason to bring Magicka DKs, because why waste a melee spot on a Magicka DK when you can take in a Stamina DK which pulls 15 to 20k more DPS in the exact same spot. So while people are saying Magicka DKs are completely dead, that's kind of an over-exaggeration. They're still in a good spot. They can still pull very good DPS, but for competitive raid teams, you know, the ones who are going for the top spots in leaderboards, who are going for score runs, depending on your raid lead and what you guys are running, Magicka DKs might not be the best option to run anymore for Magicka DPS. I mean, it kind of hasn't been for a while, but the people who are saying that Magicka DKs are basically falling below Magicka Wardens in terms of DPS are completely lying. Magicka DKs still pretty much fall between Templars and Sorcs when it comes to DPS, so they're kind of third to fourth in line depending on your specific setup when it comes to the 5 classes. So Magicka DKs are going to definitely see a nerf when it comes to their in-raid ceiling. So your dummy parses, if you're using Double Inferno, they're not really going to go up or down. If anything, they'll only go up because you're not speccing for off balance anymore. So you know, the redistribution of CPs will boost your DPS a little bit, but Magicka DKs are still pretty much the third best option for Magicka DPS if you're not counting a ranged Magplar. Ranged Magplar will come in third, and then you have the Magicka DK coming in fourth with the melee Magplar coming in below it, and obviously Magicka Wardens are dead last when it comes to Magicka DPS. But that's pretty much it in terms of Magicka DKs. Yes, it is a nerf, but people are blowing it out of proportion. The other Magicka DPS that's probably going to change up a little bit are going to be Nightblades and Sorcs, as well as Melee Magplars. Melee Magplars did get a little nice buff when they recalculated the damage from sweeps, so it actually works as intended. But Melee Magplars still fall short of ranged Magplar based on my tests on the PTS, so I'm not anticipating Melee Magplar to be making a comeback anytime soon. If you are going to be running a Magplar, you will be most likely be using a ranged setup with the Inferno Asylum staff on the front bar. Melee Magplars, I'm still going to play around with them to see if I can get something comparable to a ranged Magplar build, or at the very least comparable to a MagGK DPS output, but based on what I've been playing around with on the PTS, it doesn't seem like it's very likely, or it's going to take probably something like Moondancer, which is a little bit going to be difficult to test consistently because of the way the proc works. But Melee Magplars are also pretty much dead in the water unless they fix Jesus Beam, unless they fix Radiant Oppression, because that is still scaling incorrectly. We're still missing out on pretty substantial amounts of damage from J-Beam. Nightblade's got a nice buff with the changes to Merciless Resolve and Unrelenting Focus, so both Stamina and Magicka Nightblades got a nice buff with their DPS. It's not really going to affect high-end players as much as lower-end players. Basically what's happening is the stacks for the bow procs will continue to carry over when you re-up the buff or when the buff runs out, Merciless or Relentless. So basically, that means you can carry over your light attack stacks to the next time you re-up the buff, which basically means you can put out more bow procs and it'll be a little bit more consistent now. So it's a nice buff for the lower end medium player, you know, the guys who are just starting to learn how to use Nightblades. For the high end players, it's still a buff, but it's not going to be nearly as noticeable. I believe LZH says we'll be able to pull out 4 bow procs in theory every once in a while, depending on how many stacks you have when you re-up your buff, as opposed to the current 3 for each time you buff, assuming you're hitting your light weaves and you're off the hit mechanics or anything like that. So Magicka Nightblades are definitely now the top of the Magicka DPS spec. Before they were kind of trading blows with Magicka Sorcs, but now they're definitely pushing way ahead of Magicka Sorcs. So expect a lot of Magicka Nightblades to come in with your Magicka DPS. And the same thing with Stamina Nightblades. With the buff to Stamina Nightblades, that Relentless Focus, you're going to see a lot more Stamina Nightblades, I think. I still think that Stamina DKs are going to be the preeminent Stamina DPS, just because they have a very simple rotation compared to the Nightblades' much higher, much steeper learning curve. But Stamina Nightblades did get a nice buff, so I anticipate the best Nightblades being able to outparse a Stamina DK, the average high-end Stamina DK. But that still remains to be seen. So we'll see how that all plays out. Stam DKs are still going to be probably one of the best stamina specs to use. You're still going to want to have Stamplers in group for Power Up the Light, that the minor breach and minor fracture. Stamina Wardens are pretty much in the exact same place they were before, kind of the low end of Stamina DPS, and Stam Sorcs again are going to be pretty much where they were before. So the pecking order for Stamina DPS hasn't really changed too much. There might be a swap between Stam DKs and Stamina Nightblades for the top spot, but Stamina DPS, you're pretty much going to be safe. You are going to probably see a lot more light attack builds out because of the nerf to off bounce. Just because you're losing off bounce uptime, which means your heavy attacks aren't doing as much damage. So there's not really a reason to run a heavy attack build unless you're Stamina DK with Molten Armaments. So you're probably going to see Stam Sorcs, Stamplars, and Stamina Wardens probably shift from 2 to 3 heavy attacks to only 2 heavy attacks max on their front bar, if they are doing 2 heavy attacks. Probably going to see only 1 heavy attack actually on the front bar. But because of this, you're probably going to see Red Guards. They're already the strongest stamina race, but you're going to be even more stamina Red Guard DPS now. That's because of their sustain from the Adrenaline Rush boost. And then for Magicka DPS, pecking order has shifted a little bit, but not too much. Basically, it's still going to be Magicka Nightblades on top. Magicka Sorcs, if you are running a heavy attack build, you actually won't be seeing that big of a drop in DPS. It is going to be a nerf just because you're losing out damage on the off-balance uptime. However, you have to keep in mind you are redistributing your CPs, so you know that's kind of shifting damage away from certain places, so you're no longer having 75 into Thaumaturge for the Exploiter passive. So by taking those CPs and kind of shifting them around, you're kind of making up a little bit for that DPS loss from the Exploiter passive no longer being as strong. So heavy attack builds are still going to be very viable for endgame content. And then after the Magicka Sorcs, you have ranged Magplars with an Asylum Staff using Force Pulse build, and then Magicka DKs, and then melee Magplars, and then Magicka Wardens. So Magicka Wardens didn't really get any buffs, so the pecking order is pretty much the same for Magicka DPS. Now in terms of sets, what's going to be changing around with sets? With the new Monster Helm set, Zan, unless ZOS nerfs it again when the patch goes live, Zan is going to be the go-to for Magicka DPS. Now it does have a 10-meter radius, so once you go past 10 meters away from the enemy, that line does break and then you lose damage. But for most fights, you're going to be within that 10-meter radius as a Magicka DPS. For example, in Ethereal Archive, you're pretty much stacked right next to the boss. You're not really moving around too much. You know, against the mage or the warrior. So Zan is still going to be best in slot for pretty much every single Magicka DPS class. I will still say you want to hold on to a ranged Monster Helm set, so something like Scoria or Lambris, for those instances where you do have to play at range. For example, in VAS, it'll be helpful to have something like Scoria there. But Zan is still going to output the most DPS out of all the Monster Helm sets. You just have to be within that 10-meter radius, which for a lot of fights, you're pretty much going to be there. It's just for AA, it's pretty much all the fights. For HRC, it's pretty much going to be all the fights. SO, again, pretty much all the fights. Maw, probably not going to be very useful in, for example, Zaj in Maw, because you are moving around a lot, so you will be breaking out of that 10-meter radius. For Hoff, it might not be as useful in certain fights for Hoff. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, for example, if you are one of the Magicka DPS and needs to go up top, it might not be as great to use Zan, but again, that's kind of up to you. And then VAS, obviously, don't want to use Zan because the bosses are jumping around a lot, you're moving around a lot against Ohms. So pretty much all the Kraglorns are going to be good. Some of the fights in Hoff, Rakat in Maw, so that's where Zan's going to be very useful. So I would recommend trying to get a set of Zan once the patch goes live if you can. Now there are going to be two sets that you're going to want to take a look at potentially getting for Dragon Bones. The first one is going to be Burning Spellweave, and the second one is going to be Mechanical Acuity. Now, unless they nerf either of the two sets, I know there was some whispers in the wind that they might be nerfing Mechanical Acuity because it is kind of overperforming, but I mean, in my opinion, it's not really overperforming that much. So you do want to pick up Burning Spellweave. That comes from City of Ash. That's going to be best in slot for definitely Magicka DK still, potentially for Magplars, and potentially for Sorks if you're going double Inferno on a Sork. More on that later. But for Nightblades and Wardens, you guys are probably still going to want to stick with Julianos if you're going with the 5-3-2 setup. Again, more on that later. And then Mechanical Acuity is a crafted set, 6 traits from Clockwork City. Again, if they don't nerf it, you're going to want to pick up a set for Magicka DPS and Stamina DPS too. It does very well on Stamina DPS as well. The problem with Mechanical Acuity is that the effectiveness of the set is going to vary tremendously based on your group composition and your group dynamics. For example, in Mechanically Challenge or Accidental Aggro or What Mechanics, where they have very good buff uptimes, Mechanical Acuity is going to be a lot stronger compared to a raid guild that's just starting to learn how to do vet trials, or even a mid-tier raid guild, who are able to clear, the Kraglorn trials, the vet Kraglorn trials. So do keep that in mind with Mechanical Acuity. It is a very strong set, and I do have a couple of builds that takes full advantage of Mechanical Acuity's proc chance. For example, on Magicka Nightblades, it's very, very powerful. But again, we're going to have to see if they do decide to nerf it between now and when the patch drops. There has been whispers in the wind of a nerf coming from Mechanical Acuity. So if that nerf does go live, I will reevaluate my builds and kind of see whether it's worth running Acuity or not. So there is another piece of equipment that you're going to want to try to get for Dragon Bones, and that's going to be the Maelstrom Inferno Staff. Because of the shift to Off Balance, basically Off Balance now has a 5-second duration on a 15-second cooldown, which means it has a 33% uptime. That basically means that you're going to see a lot of Magicka DPS shift away from a Lightning Staff backbar to an Inferno Staff backbar instead. So basically, you're going to see a lot of double Inferno builds. The only class where this might not be happening is going to be Magicka Sorcerers, because you do have a passive under the Sork line that does increase your shock damage by, I believe it's 5%. So you could see Sorks doing Inferno Lightning, a Lightning backbar, Inferno front bar, or double Lightning still. But ultimately, because I did a few tests on the PTS, Inferno still pulls out better on Sorks if you are a Dunmer. But if you're an Ultimer in your Mag Sork, Inferno Lightning is still a very powerful choice. It doesn't come that far off from double Inferno on a Dunmer. Definitely, if you don't have a Maelstrom Inferno Staff, I would recommend picking one up. But that being said, a Lightning Staff on the back bar still is very powerful. It's just not going to be quite as good as an Inferno Staff back bar. And that's just due to the off-balance changes. Now, if both of your healers are running Lightning Staves, or if you have 2 Sorks running Lightning Staves, you're going to have enough Lightning Walls in order to keep the off-balance up at the 33% uptime. So there's not a need for 4 or 5 or 6 Lightning Walls anymore. For stamina DPS, nothing much is really changing. The only thing that's going to be changing is you might want to pick up a set of Acuity, Mechanical Acuity, but there's really nothing changing in terms of sets. You still have your same old debuff sets, your buff sets, and VO, Twice Fang, Veladreth is still very strong. It's still Zan does not actually out DPS Veladreths ever since they nerfed Zan. So you're still gonna basically stamina DPS in terms of sets. You guys are gonna be pretty much exactly where you are right now. Even your weapons, they're not going to change too much. Enchants, traits, things like that. For Magicka DPS, the only thing that might be changing is instead of using Nirn on your back bar, you might be using Infused. I know there are people I've been saying Nirn or Infused on your back bar, but with the changes to off balance, there's no longer going to be a need to heavy attack on your back bar anymore. So Infused is definitely going to win out instead of Nirnhone now. In the past, it's kind of been Nirnhone's very good on the Lightning Staff back bar because it helps boost your heavy attack, AoE damage, things like that. But with an Inferno Staff, just go with Infused. You don't need Nirnhone anymore. So you're probably going to see double Infused for Magicka DPS now. For healers, there is a new set coming out, Yorvold's Guidance, yes, which is going to be potentially very good for healers. Now this is kind of going to be dependent on your group and kind of what's happening here. So basically Yorvold's Guidance basically increases the duration of any buffs, major or minor buffs I should say, so basically any named buffs, so it doesn't boost things like Spell Power Cure, boost their duration by 40%, and as well as any shields you give them, so things like Healing Ward or Igneous Shields if you're a DK healer, the duration gets increased by 40%, which is a pretty nice buff. However, for most healers, for Templar healers for example, that's only really going to impact two main things. That's going to be impacting your major force from your Warhorn as well as Warhorn uptime, because I believe the minor toughness does count as a named buff obviously, as well as the aggressive horn. And Combat Prayers, Minor Berserk, Minor Ward, and Minor Resolve. Those are all going to get buffed, but depending on what you're already doing, it's not really going to make that much of an impact. If you are a healer, for example, in Mechanically Challenged, you're not really going to see as much use out of Yorvold's Guidance, because you already have pretty much 100% uptime on Combat Prayer, so it's not really going to help you out there. And I did the math, and on average, it's only going to boost your major force uptime by, I believe it's around 7% for each set of Yorvold's Guidance that you have in group. So, for example, if you have, let's say, 53% uptime on major force in a given parse, with Yorvold's Guidance, you'd only be up to about 60% uptime on major force, which is a DPS boost. I'm not saying it's not, but it might not be worth giving up something like Worm or Mending. Another set that might come into play for healers is going to be Twilight Remedy, and that's just due to the changes in the synergies. So the way synergies are changing is they're no longer on the global cooldown rotation, so you can just use them whenever you want, and every synergy, up to 3 people can actually activate it now, and it's going to be a lot clearer visually when you can use a synergy. So with Twilight Remedy now, and the changes to synergies being a lot more consistent, you might see Twilight Remedy make a comeback here. So the 5-piece for Twilight Remedy is if you're a healer and let's say you throw down an orb and somebody pops your orb, they get minor force for 10 seconds. Now that is a pretty nice boost, but it only really helps out your Magicka DPS, because Stamina DPS are already running Rearming Trap, which gives them some minor force boost. So it's not really going to be useful for melee DPS, but if you have Magicka DPS in the group, like if you're running 6 Magicka, 2 melee, it might be useful to have Twilight Remedy now, because you can get that minor force uptime. So if you're using something like Orbs and you're a Templar, Orbs, Extended Ritual, and Blood Altar might be an actual good skill to have as a healer come Dragonbones, because they did buff the radius, so it's now a 28-meter radius for that synergy activation. So if you have those 3 synergies up, you can get 100% uptime on minor force on your Magicka DPS if they're able to time the synergies correctly. Even something like a 60 to 70% uptime on minor force is going to be a pretty sizable DPS boost. So it might be worth, if you're going for something like score or speed runs, to get rid of Mending and replace that with Twilight Remedy. So if you're a healer, I would recommend looking at picking up a set of Twilight Remedy. It is potentially going to be a really strong set come Dragonbones. And finally, for tanks, with the block cost changes, you might see people shift from large infused, small sturdy to all sturdy pieces. You're definitely going to despite the fact that it is a nerf to your block cost, you're still going to want to run all block cost enchants because it is still dropping the cost of block. So do stick with the block cost enchants, but you might see a lot of people running 8 sturdy now instead of the large infused, the small sturdy with the changes to block cost, just because it is going to end up being more expensive, regardless of whether you're using shield play enchants or not. So just reducing that block cost as much as you can using sturdy pieces might be the way to go from now on. So we'll see how that all plays out, but that's what I'm anticipating is going to happen. You might see someone, do 2 infused and the rest sturdy, but 8 sturdy is probably going to be the best when it comes, if you're just starting to learn how to tank because of is the increase in the block cost. The other set that you're going to want to try to pick up if you haven't done so already is going to be Alkosh, because again, the changes to synergies means that Alkosh is going to be a little bit easier to proc and maintain now. So it'll be very nice to have an Alkosh set if you want to use it. Again, that's going to be something you want to talk about with your raid lead, because a lot of people prefer the very consistent Torug's Crusher enchant versus the less consistent Alkosh proc. Even though the Alkosh proc is stronger, and you do get more of a debuff, you still have to consider that when the Alkosh proc isn't on the enemy, you're doing significantly less damage because you're missing out on that 3k penetration. So that's something you're going to want to discuss with your raid lead. But Alkosh is going to be easier to proc now with the changes with synergies, so it is worth picking it up again. A lot of groups have kind of shied away from Alkosh because of that inconsistency, and I expect it to kind of stay the same, but we'll see. But in my personal opinion, Alkosh is a very good set. It's just a matter of talking with what your group wants. If you want more consistent penetration, or if you want to kind of have less consistent penetration, but when you do have the proc up, it's very, very strong. So that's pretty much it for each of the 3 roles: DPS, healers, tanks. So that's pretty much all there is to do it. Again, there could be changes between the PTS patch notes and what actually goes live. So take everything with a grain of salt. Don't gold out anything. Don't waste the tempers trying to gold out Burning Spellweave or Mechanical Acuity until the patch goes live. Once the patch goes live and we see that nothing's changed between the PTS notes right now and the actual live patch notes, then by all means go ahead and start golding out your stuff. I still would recommend not golding out Acuity until they actually do the nerf. So that would be the only reservation that I have. So definitely pick up the sets. They're still going to be strong sets, but I wouldn't recommend golding anything out until the patch actually goes live. So that's pretty much it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.